Kings, 2nd chapter. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. And Elijah said to Elisha, "Now stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel, 7 miles. The company of the prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "You do know that today the Lord will take your master away from you." And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, now stay here, for the Lord has sent me on to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said again, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they were now standing by the Jordan River. Then Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other, and the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet, if you see me as I am being taken up from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not happen." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in the whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them into 2 pieces. He then picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took that mantle of Elijah that had fallen and struck the water. And he said, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah? Where is he?" He struck the water, and the water was parted to one side and the other, and Elisha crossed over. And then going to the New Testament in Acts chapter 12. Peter was in prison. He was sleeping between 2 soldiers. He was bound with 2 chains, and sentries before the door were guarding the prison. And behold, an angel of the Lord stood next to him, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him, saying, "Get up quickly." And the chains fell off his hands, and the angel said to him, "Dress yourself and put on your sandals." And he did so. And he said to him, "Wrap your cloak around you and follow me."
Thank you, Kathy, for the lovely visual on the front of the bulletin. I wonder if they can see that at home. The picture of the little girl, Bernice, and her daddy at 5, Coretta Scott King, and Jimmy Carter standing before the picture of Martin Luther King. The 2 passages that we read today, they didn't really come together. I just put them together. So afterward, you all can throw out your ideas of why you think that they fit. I felt they fit. You know, in the lectionary, they give you an Old Testament passage, a New Testament passage, a psalm, and one of the letters from Paul toward the end. And we usually use two, something. We try to always have a gospel passage. But this time we didn't. We had about a gospel. We had the Acts, passage from Acts. Let's see, what do I want to say about all that? Well, let's just get started. The Reverend Dr. Bernice King, youngest child of Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King, gave the eulogy for her mother at her funeral in 2006. I watched it with interest, knowing its historical significance and the vast world stage it would command. Does anybody remember that one? I was curious about what King's daughter would choose to say and how she would say it. Bernice and her siblings carry the mantle of their father and their mother. Bernice was only 5 years old when her father was assassinated for his dream of racial equality and nonviolence. She grew up not really knowing her father, this father she had lost at such a young age, yet as a young adult declared, "I don't let people know this, but I think of my father constantly. Even though I knew him so little, he left me so much." She is now an ordained minister, a nationally recognized speaker, and author, CEO of the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change. The family has gone through some of their own discord over the years. Nobody is a saint. But Bernice certainly knew that she carried the mantle of her father's work and vision, and at this time, when she was 43 on the occasion of her mother's death, like Elijah's passing, she knew it even more deeply. She took this moment in history, this turning point of the generations, to tell the country and the world who watched that the mantle of justice and nonviolence was now upon us all. The rebirth of an understanding of ourselves as children of God is available to all of us. This moment, like so many moments at the end of a great one's life, was calling it forth. Like the authority that Elisha could access in himself, an authority so deeply elemental that it could part the waters, as Elijah left the world in his miraculous way, Elisha experienced his first miracle. Whatever those were, the presence of God. Bernice called upon us to accept the mantle that is now placed upon us. She announced prophetically that this potent moment in history, this chance to return to our foundations and have our lives transformed and changed, could be lost forever if we were not able to accept this responsibility. I picked this moment because Bernice, in that these speeches that people give, these eulogies at the time of death, can be so profound, so raw, so real. You know, the rest of the world kind of sheds away. You don't care whether you look a little like a fool or a sap or whatever. You know, you have something you want to say. Bernice is just a human being like you and me, except she's the daughter of Martin Luther and Coretta Scott King, and God, through history, had and will continue to have a public role for her to perform. But in that room that day that held 4 presidents and notable leaders in politics and religion, the arts, business, Bernice was transformed by the task at hand into a woman of passion and purpose and vision. Vision. Who knows what happened that day with Elijah and Elisha, but there was a vision. Emboldened by her love of her mother and her grief at her death, she became bigger than her grief, bigger than her fear, bigger than her own knowledge of wisdom, bigger than herself. She spoke as the Old Testament prophets Elijah and Elisha did, with the courage to go out on a limb for what they knew to be true. Her address to the nations in the form of a eulogy was such a powerful contrast to other public speakers that typically speak to us from our screens. With their carefully chosen words, their deliberate attempt to make all they say politically expedient. Not simply in eloquence, sometimes just in rage and wrath and mean-spiritedness, but they have a political agenda. They avoid their studied intention. Wait a minute. They avoid with studied attention anything that the media can grab hold of and whip them with later. But Bernice did not do this that day. When she spoke of the significance of the hour of her mother's death, she pointed to the symbolism of the 8 o'clock hour as a time of new birth. Now, there's more to it than that. If you remember, Coretta Scott King died of ovarian cancer. Bernice saw the significance of the specific disease that took her mother's life, this ovarian cancer, because it was in the reproductive area, which she went so far as to say was in some deeply faded way tied to our country's own need for rebirth. We talked in Sunday school today about how Martin Luther King Day fell on the day of inauguration. Do things just happen in life? Maybe, but they are worth noting. What does it mean? What does it mean, the synchronicity of something? This way of speaking that she spoke seldom gains worldwide attention because it had a lack of tempered carefulness. It had an uncensored intensity, which was its very grace, its believability, its power. Well, in the passage from 2 Kings, we have the story of the passing of the mantle from Elijah to Elisha. The water parts when Elijah strikes it with his mantle, and with Elijah watching, the chariot and horses of fire take Elijah up into the whirlwind. Now Elisha must shine with his own light. It now falls to him to accept the power and carry on the prophecy. Let's really look at that word prophecy. Let's play with that word. What does it mean? Who are those prophets? What does it mean to have prophecy? In the final verses, Elisha takes the mantle that had fallen from Elijah and standing on the banks of the Jordan taps the water, which now parts. The passing of leadership is grounded in spiritual awareness and requires deep receptivity and involves transformation. One is not bequeathed real power simply because he or she is next in line. If one's religion, for instance, is to have any real power in his life or her life, or any real potency in the world around him or her, it cannot be merely inherited religion. One must witness faith's power to transform. One must experience the discomfort of transformation, and one must speak that vision with courage, even at the risk of appearing a fool. I don't know how many of you were able to watch the funeral of Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, who lived and worked for the good of this nation, his God, and family for the full 100 years of his life. 100 years of his life. If you didn't, perhaps you could catch some of it. It's really worth listening to speeches. Now, I was kind of a speech major when I was young and did a master's in speech, so I have a real interest in speeches, but if you take the time to not do all the other things you're supposed to be doing around a house and you just sit down and you listen, there's some just tremendous gems. His pastors, his peers, the leaders who served under him, those that have come after him, as well as his family, probably his grandson was the most powerful, told moving stories and expressed in eloquent words Carter's commitment, his competence, his character, his humility, his intelligence, his service, and his deep and abiding faith. As I watched this celebration and this honoring of a great life, I thought about the audience and what they might be thinking and feeling in this pivotal moment of international farewell. Did anybody else do that? Look at the leaders whose faces were right in front of us. Whether they saw its importance and its charge to their own lives and to the lives they are called to serve. Jimmy Carter's destiny, like the other great ones among us, was bigger than his own life. Could they understand this as true of their own lives as well? Interesting, isn't it? Think of the powerful humility that comes when you get your ego out of the way, truly out of the way, and yet you know that your life is bigger than your own. You know that you have a calling. It's not because you're something special. It's because you're being asked to come forward in life, the way that life has fallen around you, the father you had, the mother, or whether the lack of father or mother that you had that pushed you forward into life, the relationship you have to God. So Jimmy Carter's destiny, like other great ones among us, was bigger than his own life. Could they understand this as true of their lives as well? What about his strong will for good, his respect for the rights of all human beings, his prophetic and honest concern for the future, which he knew would go beyond his own personal political career? In fact, he made decisions that really cut his tenure in office short. In our New Testament passage today, we're taken into the prison in which Peter has been thrown by the authorities for his teaching and healing in the name of Jesus. We are told of an angel who came to free him of his chains. Well, we know that Peter and Paul particularly were given the mantle of Jesus to move forward, to build the church. Many others, followers, understood as well that they carried the mantle of Jesus after his death. After being freed, the angel commanded Peter to put on his sandals, to wrap your cloak around you, and to follow me. Just as Elisha had picked up the mantle of Elijah, which had fallen from him, and put it on, Peter emerged renewed with much work still to be done. So what about us? What's this have to do with you and me? Can 100 people in a little church in Arvada, Colorado, imagine ourselves as having any part to play in this epic journey toward justice? Okay, I'm going to ask that again. And somebody can just plain old stop me and answer. It'll be fun. Can 100 people in a little church in Arvada, Colorado, imagine themselves as having any part to play in this epic journey toward justice? Not just our only personal salvation or comfort, but our part in this larger drama of history on the national and world stage. Are we simply a bunch of friends who come together to comfort and support each other, who enjoy each other's company, who want our kids and grandkids to learn a little bit about the Christian faith? Now that in itself is good stuff. I'm not putting it down, don't get me wrong. But is there a way that we see ourselves as part of something much bigger and as deeply connected in virtue and purpose with others, living and dead? Nations, religions, races, genders, ages. As we witness a peaceful transition of power this week in the inauguration of new leadership, can we trust and bless and protect the process, even if we're not so sure about the individuals? Do our voices and our transformations and our commitments matter in this moment in history? We talked about some work that Bruce Morrison and his group are doing at the local level right now to take it into their own hands, to work with immigrants and to make a plan. Are we willing to risk appearing as fools? Can we even imagine that if we accept the mantle that we've been given as Christians and as citizens of this great country, that it might be possible for the waters to part our separateness and our cynicism and our greed and our fear and our helplessness and our violence, and let us together cross over into God's reign of peace and justice? Or perhaps, just perhaps, the transparency of our hearts, the conviction of our love, can reach even the most hardened cynics. It might raise our defenses or embarrass our sense of being rational beings to follow the prophets of old and of today, who speak with a rawness and vulnerability and passion that opens our cynical ears. When we honor and eulogize the virtuous ones that have come before us, we honor God. And in our deep compassion for suffering people, and in our honest anger toward the greed and blindness and racism that have brought so much suffering, we honor our shared world. Prophecy is not a prediction of the future, but a deep understanding and spiritual awareness of the events of the present and the events of your own personal life that allow one to imagine the future with amazing accuracy. It seems that contemporary prophets, like contemporary saints, usually have to be dead before they are recognized or heard, or maybe where they don't threaten us quite as much. Whether we see the words and actions of the compassionate, courageous, wise, and faithful ones who have passed on their prophecy, whether that's a prophecy with a small p or a capital P, it behooves all of us to listen and to share them. Here are just a few I will close with from the recently deceased James Earl Carter. A strong nation, like a strong person, can afford to be gentle, firm, thoughtful, and restrained. It can afford to extend a helping hand to others. It's a weak nation, like a weak person, that must behave with bluster and boasting and rashness and other signs of insecurity. And then he said, we cannot be both the world's leading champion of peace and the world's leading supplier of the weapons of war. And he said, I have one life and one chance to make it count for something. My faith demands that I do whatever I can, wherever I am, whenever I can, as long as I can, with whatever I have to try to make a difference.